I'm Reggie Turner, and I'm here with Terrence Moore and Jim Miller. The Flipside starts right now. Welcome to the show. Tonight we are joined by Russ Hodge, founder of Three Roads Communications. Russ, welcome to the show.
Thanks, very nice to be here.
Russ, we have you on the show tonight because you are working on a new documentary for our community, The House on Jonathan Street. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about Russ Hodge, Three Roads Communications, and some of your work.
Well, one of my favorite topics talking about me. We're a Frederick-based video production, TV production company. We had a documentary called Rescue in the Philippines back in 2014 that qualified for an Academy Award. We do a ton of work for public television, and The House on Jonathan Street is a documentary that will be airing nationally on public television in time for Black History Month next year.
Excellent. Jim?
So, in terms of the what led you to the documentary for the Jonathan Street location?
It's a great question. I was reading the Baltimore Sun when the pandemic had first started. Saw a very interesting article about the log cabin, and emailed it to my son, who works for Three Roads, also is a history major, and also been on a number of archaeological digs. And I said to him, am I crazy, or is there a story here? And he sent it right back and said, yeah, no, there's definitely a story. We call Reggie and Terrence, went up for a meeting, I think that day or the next day, and you never get the principals involved in a story that quickly. And met outside, I think, wearing masks, had a cup of coffee, and talked it over. And they started telling us all of the tangential stories around. It's not just the log cabin, and the documentary itself is not just about the log cabin. We're using Hagerstown and Jonathan Street as kind of a metaphor for America, particularly the America that existed in small towns and cities. And as a lot of people have said to us that we've interviewed, you know, Hagerstown is a metaphor for America, and every city in America had a Jonathan Street. And the stories they were telling us were fascinating. And we love history. We've done a ton of historical television programming. And as we've delved deeper and deeper and deeper into this, the story gets even richer and richer. And frankly, even at my age, I find it kind of gratifying that there was so much I did not know. Not only about Black history, but all history and the different things that went on. This has really kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things that I thought I knew beforehand, but I never did.
Interesting.
Well, talking about you again, you just recently picked up some awards and accolades here from some of the other work as well.
We did. Actually, last year we were nominated for an Emmy Award for a program that we did for PBS. This year we just won 6 Telly Awards for various projects that we have produced nationally and locally, ranging from veterans organizations to nonprofits, to actually a promo that we did for another PBS pledge show that we had done. So kind of, we do a very wide range of things. Telling stories is telling stories no matter what the topic is. And we like to think of ourselves as storytellers. And what we like to do is find really, really interesting, compelling, little-known stories. And the Jonathan Street story is really kind of, you know, right at the top of the sort of stories that you can tell.
So The House on Jonathan Street, with all that hardware, all those awards, are you calling your shot? Is this going to bring something home?
Yes. I will. Oh, what the hell? Yeah. Yes.
There you go.
I'm not a betting man, but yes, I'd bet heavily on us right now.
I hear you. I'm sitting here looking at the list of people that you've interviewed thus far. How many hours?
Right now we have about 60 hours of interview footage, everybody from Senator Van Hollen. We're actually interviewing Representative Trone tomorrow. We have interviewed 7 residents of Jonathan Street, past or present. We actually, interestingly, with the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts, we are doing 2 full days of taping at their Jonathan Street exhibition in July with community members. So that's actually, you know, it's interesting the way this whole project has developed, just looking at it from the outside, in that it's spurred so much talk. It was almost like it was just waiting to happen and it needed something to ignite it. And the renovation of that cabin, I think, is what did it. Senator Benson, we interviewed at the Fine Arts Museum last week. Actually, Paul Quarterman called her the other senator from from Hagerstown. But Senator Benson said it best, and I think you'll see a little clip later on from the interview where she said this is kind of said that our history counts, we count, and it's a really great starting point. And I think that's what it is. And again, our documentary is not just about the cabin. We use it as a jumping off point to tell the story of the history of Jonathan Street, the history of Hagerstown, and frankly, the history of America. And one of the interesting things I think about having somebody from outside the Hagerstown community actually tell that story is you kind of spot things that people here take for granted. I know you grew up in New York, I grew up in New York, never went to the Statue of Liberty in my life, never went to the Empire State Building in my life, because it was there and it's too commonplace. So now you have people from outside the area coming in, you're saying, wow, this is incredible. Who knew this? Who knew that on John Brown's farm, they used to hold, it was owned by a group called the Black Elks, and that James Brown and Etta James and Ray Charles all played there, and there used to be great concerts there. And it's like, just, I don't know, the irony or the synergy of that all getting together, that John Brown's farm then became a concert venue for the Chitlin Circuit. It's just kind of mind-boggling in a way. And I'm sure almost nobody in this area really knows that story. And if they do, they just take it for granted the way we took, the Empire State Building for granted.
Well, they'll know it now.
They'll know it now.
Yeah. So as you look at what you're producing, one of the things that the chief archaeologist for the state of Maryland, Department of Transportation, who really headed up the project from that perspective, Julie Shablitsky, Dr. Shablitsky, one of the things she said to us the last time she was on is that one of the pieces that she was involved with had the most views of any project she has done anywhere. So you're right; it is generating a lot of interest, a lot of views. What do you find particularly unique about this project?
I think Nick Redding from Preservation Maryland said in one of the interviews, preservation was always about, saving the place where George Washington slept. This is a story, this is a window into the lives of ordinary people, the kind of people who got up every morning and went to work and took care of their kids, and it showed you how life was really lived and how really they overcame a lot of obstacles. If you really, really look into it and try not to get too psychological about it or anything else, it's really kind of a look into the human condition and what human beings are capable of doing and the sacrifices that they are willing to make for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. One of the things that really struck me when we were interviewing Senator Benson, she was talking about the old North Street School, which was an all-black school. And she said that the expectations in the community were so high between the parents, the neighborhood, and the teachers that those kids would never fail. There was too much of a support system for them there because the generation of their parents was willing to sacrifice and make sure that the kids were successful and got launched. And I don't think that's a black story or a white story. I think that's an American story.
I like that. It's like a treasure map to get us back to where we need to be.
Right.
Exactly.
Something that I remember, even myself. It took a village. If you got in trouble by the entire village. You were held accountable by the entire village. You were celebrated by the entire village. And timing of this project is something else I wanted to kind of point to, because I believe when we first met, we were still trying to find out what COVID was going to be.
Yes, right?
And the
And
incident
George Floyd had not happened.
Exactly.
That is
George
correct,
Floyd had
yes.
not happened yet.
Yeah.
And kind of hearing and looking at the teaser, just the teaser alone, talking to this transition of manufacturing and what some of those impacts are. And now we're looking at this region bringing back manufacturing and what it meant when it left. Talking about the black community and black businesses and seeing the rise of black businesses happening at the same time. So it was interesting to watch a documentary talk about the past and be reliving a lot of it, or the impacts of a lot of it today.
Exactly.
There's an interesting quote from a TV show, and I'm not going to be able to tell you the TV show, but the quote goes something like this: achievement is often anonymous. And it talks about the fact that some of the greatest things that ever happened because there are people that are quietly dedicating their lives to improving the lives of others. And when you said the story of the common man, that struck me.
It really is, and it is the story of America. Immigrants came here, all of our forefathers came here, whether willingly or unwillingly, and they stuck their roots into the ground, and they said the next generation will do better, and the next generation will do better, and they made those sacrifices. And that was what was happening on Jonathan Street. Frankly, it was what was happening in Hagerstown, all over Hagerstown. There were people working their butts off in factories doing jobs they probably didn't particularly like, but it paid the mortgage and got the kids through school and put food on the table.
And with companies like Fairchild, it got us through World War II with Rosie the Riveter, as they are commonly called.
Yep.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the things we discovered, Fairchild even had a separate facility for the black workers, too. So black workers were very much involved even during the World War II effort. So it's kind of, that's one of the very interesting things about this whole documentary process that we've been doing, is we keep on covering layers and layers and layers. It's not on like the archaeological dig they did at the site itself. And the more you go down, the more shards of information that you get. And it's really quite gratifying. It's also quite difficult because right now we probably have about a 3-hour documentary that we have to get down to about an hour or so. But it's a heck of a lot of information.
Well, there are so many ways you could put this together in terms of treatment to
Absolutely.
tell many different stories.
Absolutely. We're trying to be somewhat linear in fashion and touch on the high points. But again, Van Hollen and a bunch of other people said Hagerstown is America in miniature. And you know, what's happened over the past 50 years or so in terms of deindustrialization and then trying to fight its way back and everything. It's really, you know, it is a story of what's happened in much of America, and hopefully it is kind of a beacon for where towns like this around America are going too.
Well, and you know, it's interesting if you look at, and maybe after this segment or maybe next week, but sometime the three of us that host the show every week will get back to banging on our politicians that are running and banging on the politicians that are in office and talking about the things that are wrong and the things that need to be fixed. But if you look at Hagerstown as a community, if you look at Washington County as a community, we have a rich history of being first in a number of things. And there's a gentleman locally named Tom Rayford. He actually is working for the state now. But Tom could rattle off a list of 50, 60, 70 things that Washington County, that Hagerstown, that Williamsport, Boonesboro, Smithsburg, Hancock was the first to do. And
I
it
saw
really
him a
is
couple
quite.
weeks ago when he did rattle off that.
And yeah, he does it all the time. He does it all the time.
And he
But
did it when I was in Annapolis
Yes,
about a
he-
month ago.
Yes, was
He
trying to
does
hook
it all
us
the
up with
time.
The museum in Boonesboro. and everything.
But it is very interesting, and I think it is a micro picture of America in terms of what we do here,
What do
and
you
I think we have a lot to be proud of.
You do. One of the things that really was interesting to me, we interviewed Kristen Allenshire last week, and you know, he said he made a deliberate decision to come back here after he left. And there were a lot of other people who talked about that too. It's kind of a very large level of love that they have for the city and the area. At one point I said something to him about Silicon Valley. He said, oh, I wouldn't want to be in Silicon Valley. I like my life right here, you know? And there is a deep-seated love for the area and for the city among a lot of the people, which is really, not only is it profound, it's kind of touching in a way.
Well, and I'm going to take 15 more. I know this is off topic, and I'm going to take 15 more seconds. The proof for me in that point is we've had a lot of big industries, companies like Citigroup, Volvo, First Data, any number of them that are these large companies that bring in these CEOs and these presidents and these leaders from other communities, and when they retire, guess where they stay? They stay right here. And that speaks, in my view, a lot. It speaks volumes about our community.
I wasn't supposed to be here this long. I came down with one of those corporations, and here I am 18 years later, and more involved in this community than I have ever been in my community back home in New York City. But at the same time, my community in New York City is just as needing and replicates what we're doing right here in Jonathan Street and in Hagerstown. And I think a big thing about this is it's a hub, right? And logistics is important. And not logistics of just moving products and freight, but people and culture as well that intertwines, that comes into this hub as well. And you can see some of that being, and that's why you're first, right? And that's where diversity becomes important. And I think that's a great tool and resource, but not always used, recognized, or taken advantage of.
Oh, well, I've lived in Frederick for 32 years now, and the changes that have happened in Frederick, not all of which are good, but generally speaking in terms of wealth and influence and the quality of the jobs and education levels, has really been incredible over the past 3 decades or so. And a lot of that has to do with all the biotech that came in there, and then there was an incredible amount of diversity, people coming from all over the world to work either for Fort Detrick or for the contractors that supply Fort Detrick. So it really is an amazingly diverse place, and you start seeing that more and more happening in Hagerstown. And the thing I think they found in Frederick is that that diversity is not something to fear. It's something that really actually helps them, helps the economy.
Russ, you know, in regards to this entire experience and thinking about our relationship over the past 2 years, sometimes it's hard for people in the community, as you were saying when you were talking about New York, of seeing what a gem telling these stories and getting to the understanding is. Yeah, you were able to join us Monday for our meeting at the Fine Arts Museum for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. Can you share a little bit of what your experience was being there, filming that, being a part of that meeting, of how the commissioners from around the state and the stakeholders that were in the room, how this story and this documentary is resonating with them?
It was very interesting for me to see, because it seems that the Washington County, Western Maryland area is very far ahead in terms of the services that are being provided, the stories that are being told, and that there is much more of a not completely academic view of everything. It is an economic development tool as well as a device to help people understand their past, and an educational device. And it seemed like the commission really appreciated that, and they viewed that as a model for the way things need to be going, not only here in Western Maryland, but throughout the state and frankly throughout the country. I mean, I think everybody's waking up to the fact that things like Jonathan Street and a lot of the tourism sort of things are enormous economic engines. And it's exactly the economic engine you want, because people spend money and then they go home, and you don't have to educate kids or provide, fire services or anything else for them.
Excellent. We're going to hold right there. We'll have you come back, introduce the teaser reel that we have, and then we'll jump into that after the break.
We have a world premiere here, right?
We have a world premiere coming
Excellent.
This is like entertainment today.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That's it.
So everyone, please stick with us. We'll be right back with more with Russ Hodge and the teaser reel from the documentary of the house on Jonathan Street after the break. Welcome back to the show. Russ, thank you for staying with us. Russ, we would like for you to give us the overview of this documentary this teaser reel that we have, and then we will show it to the public.
Very difficult. We have dozens and dozens of hours of interviews and footage that we've shot so far, a lot of drone footage and everything else. We've been at the groundbreaking, we've been at during the archaeological dig. We have to cut all those probably 75 hours of footage now down to an hour or 55 minutes for public TV distribution. It really should be about a 3-hour documentary. We were tasked then with coming up with this, which is about 4 minutes. It's some of the highlights for those who've been interviewed and did not make this. It's not any sort of verdict on what it was you said. We were just trying to tell the story in kind of an impressionistic way as much as possible. So what's interesting is what comes across from everybody that comes through here is that there is a lot of passion about not only what Hagerstown was, not only what Jonathan Street was, but what it can become and what it will become. So having said that, roll the tape.
It came over our police scanner that there was a vehicle into a house on Jonathan Street.
I know the police ran into the house. He didn't get no invitation. He didn't have to knock.
I said, I'm not tearing that building down. I'm not tearing that building down. I said, that thing's old. I said, we need to see what's going on here. Another 45 minutes and then we had it in the truck.
All those years, we're walking up and down the street and there's this tremendous piece of history right before our eyes, and no one knew. No one knew.
There wasn't a lot of emphasis or funding to save those type of properties. I see now through Preservation Maryland and other agencies that there is an emphasis.
By the time of the Civil War, there's about 4,000 African Americans in Washington County, but more than half of them were free.
They turn to John Brown, they find that the farm property is for sale, they buy it, they use it.
They used to go up there and have big times out in there, dancing, and they talk real good about John Brown. And so it was a party place now.
Everyone looked out for each other all the time.
So we have this, this intergenerational wealth building, and then it all gets taken down.
You had banks that would not provide traditional financing, and part of it was because the mortgages would not be insured by the federal government as a result of redlining.
And so a lot of African American or black prosperity was driven by American industry, by manufacturing, whether in auto manufacturing plants in Detroit, Michigan, or steel manufacturing plants in Western Maryland, or whatever it happened to be.
Basically, all the railroads on the monopoly board, short line, B&O, all once met in Hagerstown, and it was really a focal point, a gateway to the Midwest.
It's hard to find a person that grew up in Hagerstown that didn't have an uncle, an aunt, a father, a grandfather that worked at Fairchild, and there's still a pride because of that today.
Fairchild was a great place to work. The people that worked there, there was a lot of pride.
The recession of the early 80s for the country hit hard. In Hagerstown, it was almost twice as hard.
You can't have one failing area in Hagerstown and think the rest of Hagerstown is going to be okay, because we're not.
For too long, there's been disinvestment there, and just a long litany of bad breaks for that community.
And part of that rebuilding process starts with acknowledging the contributions of that community.
Look, we need to be involved. We need to recognize these things. We need to embrace history. We need to embrace the community, and we need to work together.
This museum that's putting this on display and the log cabin on Jonathan Street, that is beginning to say to people, they do recognize us. They recognize our history. There's a ray of hope for us, and we're going to rise to the occasion.
I think we know that this is going to be impactful for our community. I think we can all agree on that.
Interestingly, there'll be millions of people that see this documentary just through the public TV airings. And when you look at the demographics, they are all the high income, high education decision makers. They're the people who decide whether to move corporations somewhere or somewhere else, or at least have the money to come on trips and love heritage tourism and that sort of stuff. So I think this will have a lot of impact for the community itself. Moreover, what we're really hoping is that it makes people think a little bit. It educates them without beating them over the head. It makes them think a little bit about things that have gone on, status quos that they may have not realized were status quos, and how we all move forward together. Because again, anybody who likes history at all, this is history. It's not black history, it's not white history, it's history.
I just think anybody, period. It's a little something for everyone.
Everybody.
You know, I gravitate to the discussions around finance.
Right.
right? I know we beat the table about generational wealth. We talk about home ownership and business ownership. We try to understand why we have the numbers that we have here in this community, and at times we like to point fingers to think it was one person. This was a generation of decisions that happened, that got us to this point. And like I said earlier, it's the roadmap of possibly how do we get back.
Exactly.
So I think is a lot of information out in there from economists, from politicians as well.
Yeah.
Which is rare, right? Which is rare, but I think it's good information.
I think we have, even in this short clip, we have some things that our politicians should be thinking about, even in this election
Absolutely.
season, right? Because if you even think back to former Mayor Brucci saying that you can't have one failing part of the city and think the city is going to succeed. Now we need politicians to start speaking towards that.
Right.
Right? Because, I think that there was a missed opportunity this legislative session, right? There was a $7 billion plus surplus, but there was no movement and no ask for that part of the community that you said that needs to thrive in order for the city to thrive. So I just think that there's some opportunity there for our politicians to start addressing these issues and to showing that they have a plan to really move our community forward.
Absolutely.
You had talked about the finances, well, both of you have, and the bottom line is the bottom line. And a couple things I had no idea. First of all, Jonathan Street, that whole community had been very prosperous.
Yes.
Because of sundowning laws, they basically had to provide the services within the community, which led to a middle class. However, it was kind of all taken away, either deliberately or not deliberately. It doesn't matter if your foot gets run over by a car. It doesn't matter whether somebody did it on purpose or not. And one of the things that was kind of a revelation to me is the GI Bill, which, helped so many people, my parents included, my in-laws included, buy their first home, actually excluded African Americans. And I read a statistic earlier today. Out of 100,000 mortgages, it wasn't just in the South, 100,000 GI mortgages in New York, only 60 of them went to blacks. So this enormous economic engine, something that really helped propel America itself forward for the past 70 years or so, was not really available to African Americans. And how many people now have wealth in their family because a house was inherited from their parents or grandparents and it had been paid off over 30 years? And that was an opportunity that was denied to African Americans. And if you keep kind of totaling up all of this stuff, as a white person, it doesn't make me feel guilty because I didn't do it, but it sure as hell doesn't make me feel happy either. So.
And all of this speaks towards the numbers, right? We've talked about the wealth gap many times on this show, right? And right now, it is projected that African Americans are going to be of negative net worth by 2053. This is painting the picture in our community, and one of the things that I'm committed to as an advisor, in regards to, my service to community is I want to be a part of the solution to avoid that in our community. And I just think that this is going to gain momentum, that we can have more politicians, more business leaders, and other stakeholders on board, nonprofits, all, to start to face these issues which affect us all.
And I think that's what the power of this documentary. That was the teaser, and most people seen that for the first time. But it's not the first time they heard about this documentary, because so many people in the community from different circles of influence have taken part of this documentary. I looked through this list and going to social media, most of these people aren't even friends on social media, right? That's how diverse this group of people speaking about the same issue is. So it's getting out there, and because it's gotten out there, there's people already stepping up, because there's a level of accountability. You run over my foot, it still hurts me. It doesn't matter who ran over my foot, but if it was caught on camera, I'm suing. All right? So there's a level of accountability that comes out of this documentary, and I can say that there have been organizations and individuals who don't react in guilt, but react because they feel like there's time to take action. And one of those things that we're working on is a program we call Erasing the Red Line. And we're working with community banks to say, how do we recover? How do we take what was taken away, or opportunities that weren't given, to communities, African American communities specifically, and help them recover. Not a handout, not giving anything away, not taking something from one person and giving it to another, but creating equity and including them in the American dream.
Absolutely.
Which is being a homeowner, being a business owner. And these community banks are stepping up and having these conversations and working hopefully with our local politicians as well to say, how do we recover this? Even in some of these interviews, there were products and opportunities like this in the past that stopped. Why? I don't know, but those are the things we need to look into a little bit more. And I think that's what this documentary is doing. Even in its development, it's developing the community.
It is, and it shows that there is a much wider community that is interested in and concerned about a lot of the issues. And if I could just take a second to say something very unpopular, it's in support of politicians.
Mm-hmm.
The pay that local politicians get, and I can say this because I live in Frederick, is abysmal. What the mayor gets paid in Hagerstown, what the council gets paid, commissioners. You're talking about people who are running basically $250 million, $500 million businesses getting paid. I don't. Kristen Alshire told me he did 27 meetings a month when he first started as a councilman. He makes $8,000 or $9,000 a year. That's $1 a meeting or whatever it is. I tried to figure out. I couldn't even figure it out. That's crazy. Maybe they shouldn't be full-time jobs, but maybe they should be paid that way. It's an honor to serve, but on the other hand, I think you have a lot of people who can't afford that honor to serve at that rate. And if you want people who are willing and able to put in those hours and who have those capabilities, I think they ought to be at least paid a competitive wage.
Yeah, and I think the pay has affected the candidate pool over the years. It's been diminished. I mean, it's not that a college degree is a requirement, but you have less and less candidates coming to the table without a college degree, or leadership. Many candidates are coming to the table not even having participated in leadership Washington County. I just think that those things are a recipe for disaster in regards to a learning curve of what you're tasked with when you're coming in, and especially right now. We are in an economy that's teetering. Mm-hmm. At the same time that we have millions of dollars of investment that are coming into our community, and it's very important how those dollars are deployed and move forward, right? We have, $60 million coming in for the stadium. The city is trying to push forward their indoor turf arena. That's a lot of moving pieces and parts that you have to implement. And that's not even including the community that's been left behind and the millions of dollars that is needed there. So you need people with the leadership abilities and qualities that can bring people together to do some things that they've never been able to do, and to still spur on additional investment and bring in those other investors that would like to be here.
And I'll tell you, Brucci told us he made 3 times as much as a used car salesman every year than he did when he was mayor. And there's something wrong with that. I think it's also saying to people that those jobs aren't important.
Right.
Yeah, I'll give the flip side on that as well. This is the show, Flipside.
Nicely done.
Your job as an elected official is to represent. It's a job of public service.
Yes.
Right? No different than sitting on a board at a nonprofit organization. And I tell you right now, none of my nonprofits of the 14s gave me a dime, right? So it's a job of service and it's a job of choice. But where I do agree is it's hard to be in that position if you're not economically stable.
That is correct.
So you exclude a pool of people who cannot step away from their job, who have to work 40, 60 hours because they make more money even from a minimum wage standpoint if they were given the opportunity to serve. So I think there's some balance there you have to look at. And we also, let's not discredit the salaries that are paid to staff members who actually support these politicians as well, who do the legwork day in and day out, some of them make good salaries as well. So I think the money we pay, which I do agree is not enough, But I don't think it's to the point where we have to be paying for a position where you're running like a corporation, something like that, because it's a position of service, and because when you start adding more money to the pool, you also bring in more issues that come in as well into play. But I think it should be a larger compensation, but they're being compensated for representing and building relationships. So I think also we have to review what their role is. They're not sitting there making the decisions of every economic decision, and they shouldn't be held accountable for that either, right? Because there's a host of contributors to those decisions. They may be where the buck stops, but that buck was passed around quite a few times before it got to them. And a lot of those times that buck is passed through hands that are paid fairly well. So I just want to say that I agree to a certain extent, but I believe that we also look at our elected officials in a position that they're not truly supposed to be holding.
But bringing this back to the video and the fact that this is a historical perspective, it potentially highlights some of the good decisions that our elected officials have made.
Yes.
And some of the not so good decisions that our elected officials
We
have made.
interviewed Steve Sager, who was mayor here for
Right.
about 400 years, I think. Very interesting guy, very bright man. Obviously still loves the area, even though he doesn't live here. I can't even remember when he was mayor. I think he said he made $9,000 or $10,000 a year.
Yeah.
So while I agree with you, it is a position of service. At a certain point, a mayor's kid or a councilman's kid or a commissioner's kid still needs braces.
Absolutely.
You know,
And the fact of the matter is, it's taking time away from your family,
right.
which,
Exactly.
you know, at least for me, that is the number one priority.
Right. But by the way, I should mention our website, thehouseonjonathanstreet.com. I just
Good.
wanted to get that out there for people too. And they can see the video and a lot of other things on there.
Well, one of the interviews you've talked about with us also was Senator Van Hollen's interview, which was before he became ill.
Yes.
And he kind of made some strong statements in regards to Jonathan Street and what he was committed to. Can you speak to that?
Yes, very interestingly, and I have not seen this anywhere else, so I guess we're breaking news here. He is earmarking money in next year's federal budget for the Jonathan Street community. Pledged that right in the interview. We have it on, well, it's not on tape anymore, but you get the idea. So.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You don't work for free.
I don't.
Right? You just said, we talk about 30 interviews, hours of footage, not on top of just the interviews, but you've taken B-roll and done your research and time and hours. How does something like this get funded?
So far, we have received a state production tax credit from the state of Maryland, which will cover about 20% of the budget. We also have funding pending in front of actually the Washington County Commissioners that they are supposed to be voting on soon. There are also foundations. One of the Bowman Foundations kicked in money to us recently. There's potentially other foundation money from disparate sources. But frankly, we've been self-funding this all along, which obviously I don't want to keep doing, but it is a labor of love as well. Also, I think as people see this video now, they'll realize what it is, what the stories are that we're trying to tell, all the bases that we're trying to cover, and be very interested in funding it as well.
So one of our lovely politicians or one of these foundations
Write a
or
check. I just
the
want
banks,
the bathwater for money.
But how do they get in contact to actually support an initiative like this? And there's no GoFundMe out there or anything like that. So how do they reach out to support a project like this and its importance?
Actually, the Community Foundation here in Washington County is a fiscal agent for us for this project. That's how we received the Bowman Foundation funding. But they can reach out to us directly at 3roads, the number 3roads.com, and would be happy to talk to them. We've been doing this for 35 years. PBS TV series, we've done about a dozen of them. We've done 3 or 4 pledge specials, about 10 documentaries. So we're very well experienced. What I will tell you is that when this documentary airs, you will have at least one broadcast in each of the top 25 markets in the United States, which will cover about 70% of the population. You will have well over 1,000 broadcasts. Rescue in the Philippines, I think, had 3,000 broadcasts, and it will be played over and over again. It will be the gift that keeps on giving in terms of showing people the Hagerstown community, the Jonathan Street community, and probably the much wider American community.
So you have 75 hours of interviews, did I hear you say?
We've done over 30 interviews, 2 cameras, some of them 3 cameras.
Okay, okay. How do you get that all down to, I mean, how did you pick the 3.5, 4 minutes for this thing?
So we have, it's actually a very good question. We have a well-oiled machine right now. It's me and a bunch of young guys who actually know technology. So the interview is done, the audio is stripped, it is sent out for transcription almost immediately. It's machine transcription, so it's not 100% accurate, but it's almost there. We get the transcript back, I print it, pull the sound bites from it, and they are stored. So we actually have them stored by different topic areas now. So that when we're doing, and we've just started the whole structure of the documentary itself, it's like, okay, we need the sound bite about the Moxley band. So, okay, here's what this historian had to say, this is what this historian had to say. We need a sound bite from, you know, what the economic future of Hagerstown is manufacturing coming back? Okay, here's what Anna Robin Basu said about this. So we kind of pull it all around, and our biggest challenge right now is how much we can get into an hour without completely overwhelming people with information. Because as you all know, there's only so much information people can take in at one time. So it's really a long process.
And there's no favoritism, because I was trying to get in the teaser. I've sent emails. He said, no.
As a matter of fact, we turned us off a little bit. It was shameless what he was doing.
So let me ask this, and I don't want to go too deep into the production process, but in this type of project, do the interviews drive the treatment, or does the plan for what the story you want to tell drive the interviews?
It's like asking, is it the music or the lyrics? And the answer is it's both.
Okay.
So we go in there with a basic idea. I can't tell you how many times our basic idea has either shifted or changed completely depending upon what somebody has to say. And it's really amazing, because some of these, again, not to get too psychological or touchy-feely, but some of them turn out to be almost like therapy sessions, because after a while, people start realizing things or whatever. So some of them become emotional because of their history, their family. But even, again, Alshire the other day got very emotional when I said to him, you get paid $8,000. Why are you doing this? Why did you come back? And he got emotional, looked into the camera, and tears in his eyes and everything. Yeah, which I don't know the man, but from what I heard, that is very unusual. And the point is that the story can change depending upon what they say. So it's kind of a ever-evolving type of thing. I mean, you can go in right from the start and say, okay, here's our outline, but then a lot of other things come up in between. For instance, like I said before, the VA mortgage thing, I had no idea, you know, and there's a million stories like that. I never knew about Moxley Band, you know, I didn't know about some of the other people. Right in the beginning, I did know about Willie Mays staying at the Harmon Hotel and playing his first game at the stadium, and all that sort of stuff. I had no idea about the John Brown Farm being turned into a concert venue. Our difficulty with that, frankly, because it's a visual medium, is there is no visual record. There are no posters. There's nothing else. So it's going to be very hard to show that. We interviewed the gentleman, he was in the video, Ed Meliscus, who wrote the book, and unfortunately he doesn't have any of that sort of stuff too. So, and it's interesting because a lot of the older residents of Jonathan Street, you'd say, hey, did you used to go to the parties at John Brown's farm? And almost to a person, because they can hear their parents' voice in their head, it was like, oh, I never went, but you know, my cousin went, or my next door neighbor went, or whatever. So we're dying to get some firsthand, you know, stories on what it was like there. So, but to get back to your point, you have the basic story, you do the interviews, and the story shifts all around. So.
Has this story shifted significantly based on your original plan?
There's a hell of a lot more history here than I thought there was. Yeah,
okay.
There's a lot more. You know the old, what was it, 1950s TV thing? There's a million stories in the Naked City. Well, in Hagerstown, it seems like there's about 10 million stories.
I mean, just the work has shifted over 2 years. Yeah. I mean, I first knew that this was bigger than what we were dreaming during the archaeological dig, when you were there, and just the energy that was there with, you know, outlets from Baltimore and DC and different places coming down to the community and the way the elders were out of their homes and looking, and as people drove through, because the cabin is so unassuming, right? You know, the house in front of it butts out. So unless you know what you're looking for, you don't know that it's there. But it was such an energy and traffic. And, you know, the archaeologists saying, well, such and such stopped by, and they were sharing stories and different things of that nature. At that point, I was like, this is different. This is different, and it's going to grow exponentially.
You know, in the documentary, we have Mr. Murbaugh, whose company was the one who
Yeah.
ripped the siding off, and he stopped the demolition. And that's the way I feel about this story. It's like we ripped the siding off, and there's this whole history underneath that nobody knew was there before.
Wow.
It's a good metaphor.
Yes, it is, for sure.
And it goes back to what I was kind of saying before, that because the work is still happening and evolving, so must the documentary. You know, until the point you're going to have to just stop and say cut, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But it's just, you know, I know that we've had conversations, or we've gotten into some work, or others have reached out, and we just shoot your name, say, maybe this person be a great person to interview.
Yeah.
And some great stuff have come out of that because things continue to evolve. I just go back and I'm thinking, when we had that first meeting, we hadn't had to dig. We didn't know what the work was.
Right.
We didn't know what was going to happen in the world during that time. And there's been a lot of surprises in our world since 2020. You know, that it's going to be important that even this documentary is capturing today, which will be history for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is true.
I mean, the impressive thing is that we were able to continue even in the midst of the pandemic, right? Because the archaeological dig was outside, right?
Mhm.
So it was just like little things that kept things moving
Yeah.
when, you know, other efforts were slowed down because of the fact of kind of where we were in the world. So Russ, in kind of encapsulating this, what does February of 2023 look like?
February 2023 is Black History Month. This documentary, we really need to have it finished by the end of October, and that includes things like color correction and sound EQing and all that sort of stuff. So we are winding up the interviews for the most part now, and collecting the assets, the pictures, the stories, the records of slave purchases, all that sort of stuff, and trying to get as much as we possibly can. We worked with the Historic Society last week. Actually, we're going to transfer some old films that they have that they were not able to do for them as well, so that we can use them in the documentary. By the time this is done, the end of October, I think then we're talking about premieres around. There's a public relations push that goes on, because each one of the 300 PBS stations makes their own decision about when to cover it. And there's a big PR push that goes on all along too. People are fascinated by this story. I was thinking, you know, the little house that could, but Americans love the underdog.
Yes, they do.
And that house and that community is the underdog. And Americans, especially nowadays, after 2 years of COVID and everything else, they want to see some wins, and this thing's a win.
That was one of the things that we heard from the Baltimore Sun, the writer of the story. They were fascinated because in the midst of this doom and gloom in regards to stories, this was something encouraging that they could report on. So in regards to premiering, where do you see this premiering in
Radio
February?
City Music Hall. No, actually, if we do meet our full funding, we will have screenings in New York and California. We want to qualify this for Academy Award consideration. And I know that sounds boastful, but we did it before, and I think this story is just as good. I definitely want to do a premiere here at the theater, the Maryland Theater. Not a big film festival guy, although they have the Maryland Film Festival here, because frankly on television a lot more people get to see it, and that's what we want to do. We want people to see this. We want people, you know, to understand it, maybe take something out of it, maybe change behaviors, or maybe not, but just come to a greater understanding of what's happened in the past. So we'll be playing the hell out of it, not only on public TV, but we also have a deal with Amazon Prime that airs all of our TV series and documentaries and stuff too. So it will be seen worldwide, and on PBS it'll be seen nationally as well.
Excellent. Jim, I give you the last word on this.
So I guess the only thing that I haven't gotten to say yet is that we talked about politics earlier and the politicians, and you talked about one of our local politicians who was, you said, why do you do this for such a low salary? And he got emotional about that. When we talk about bad news, politics in America, I think, is certainly a source of bad news because we just want to kill each other, right? If you're a D, you want to kill the R, and if you want your R, you want to kill the D. This is one of the things that I hope happens out of this as we hear these politicians talk, some with great passion, is that we understand that even though we may disagree on our ideals and how we would fix a problem, there are a lot of politicians, dare I say the majority of politicians, that get into politics for the right reason, because they are passionate about doing something for their community. And I hope that this, in some small part, aids in that process.
You know, it's really an excellent point. I started out producing political shows 30 years ago for McLaughlin Group and Politically Incorrect and Fox News and everything. And I got out of it because it was the same damn issues. It was still talking about abortion and everything else.
Gun control
and gun
yeah.
control. Same stories, nothing's changed in 35 years. And it was very disappointing. But doing the interviews for this, everybody, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, they all say this is history that needs to be known. Paul Quarterman we interviewed the other day, and I think he said it best. He said, I have a 9-year-old daughter. She needs to know this story.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Russ, we very much appreciate your time.
Thank you.
This is amazing. Obviously, when this premieres in LA, we'll definitely bring you back so you can talk about that experience.
Maybe we'll go to LA.
No, I'm going.
Oh, Cronkite Turner and T are going to LA.
Flipside road trip.
There
That's
you go.
it.
By the way, when they send me guest selections, Terrence just keeps recommending himself. Sorry.
Excellent. Well, thank you much. And
My
we'll talk
pleasure.
again
Thank you.
soon. Well, that's all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, we hope you join us again next week for another episode of The Flipside.